Okay, and we're live. Um, this is Deacon Joseph Swaden.
This is Bishop Enoch.
And Alishita, how's it going?
All right, how you doing?
And welcome to the first episode of the next version of NFTU News. If you followed us for a long time, you know that we did have an NFTU News radio show on, I think it was Blog Talk Radio or something like that. So we're bringing back some of that. We're going to cover some of the news that has been going on over the past couple of months. As everybody knows, we're in the midst of the wonderful pandemic. And so we've got news that reflects that because that's what a lot of people are talking about. I have the chat live open in Odysee, so I can see if let's see. Somebody asked what time is it there now. Hello, this is Deacon Joseph. Hold on. Just to let you know, we are going live. Okay, hold on the NFTU News channel. Okay. Somebody asked what time is it there now. It's 9:08 Eastern. So, anyway, that's that. Let's see here. Make sure everything is working okay in the StreamYard. All right. So, that's basically we got a couple of news stories we're moving along with, just to cover the state of orthodoxy in the world, true orthodoxy in the world, and everything in between. So, taking a look here, what did you want to talk about first, Ladika?
Well, let's cover some of the past 2 or 3 posts on NFTU.org.com.
Okay, let's do that. So let's pull that up and go into more detail. Give me just one moment while I get that.
NFTU.net. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Hold on. Let me just share screen, and I'm going to pull that up because what's a news program without visuals? All right. Okay, so let's see. The most recent thing, hold on, is let me see here. Most recent thing that we covered was, I guess, the observations of Archbishop Hilarion Tritsky on Cologne Cathedral. And so if you wanted to, now you put that one up if you wanted to give a little background on that so we can get that going.
Have you read it?
I read some of it. It's kind of it seems like it's kind of the observations of the emptiness. It's a beautiful, he notes on the beauty of Cologne Cathedral, but basically the spiritual emptiness there.
Yes.
That seems to be what now. It is an interesting thing, and I noticed you did include a lot of the pictures for comparison.
There were, I think, there was a series of 7 or 8 letters that Archbishop Hilarion or Saint Hilarion wrote to a friend during his travels in Europe. This is before, I think these were before.
Okay, hold on. Ladiga? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. Anyway, yes. So basically, Saint Hilarion, without reading the entire post himself, he compares the interior of the cathedral as basically, like you said, he says there's a lack of God, a lack of holiness, a lack of life, and this is very common of Gothic temples. He says. And now he actually compares it to some of the older. He says if you contrast this with some of the older Russian churches, it's very obvious. But he also compares it, however, to many of the modern Russian churches from the St. Petersburg period. So he's not just indiscriminately attacking something because it's in Germany or something. If you understand my meaning,
right?
Where he says this is just as bad in many ways as, for example, what was it? The Alexander Nevsky Lavra. He says many times when you enter the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, you need to remind yourself that you entered a temple and not just some art gallery.
Right.
And he also speaks about St. Isaac's Cathedral, which later became which in the Soviet Union became the Museum of Atheism, I believe. And I think you brought something up in an email a few weeks ago about, in all fairness, that there was one cathedral you said that it had a very bad look to it too. Was it Christ the Savior originally?
Um, no, it was the cathedral in the center of St. Petersburg, um, and it was based upon. Hold on, let me see which one it is because that it's based upon basically. Um, it was based upon a specifically a church in Rome, but it has like the eye on it. Let me just give me just one moment, and I'll find it. Okay, hold on. That pulled up the Cathedral of St. Petersburg, Florida, which is actually kind of ugly too. But that's just some weird circular Roman Catholic church. But let me see here. Which church is it? Oh, okay. No, that's not. It says Kazan. Yeah, the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg. Let me see if I can just share the picture. It doesn't really even bear a resemblance to. It doesn't even really bear a resemblance to an Orthodox church. It really looks like a government building, and I'm just going to see if I can pull that up here, um, because it is really strange. But um, so this is the Kazan Cathedral in the center of town. It has, as you can see, that triangle, and there's an eye with rays emanating from it. Uh, it doesn't look like an Orthodox church at all, but it is, in fact, a cathedral in Russia. And it was designed upon Western elements, or I should say, really post-schismatic Western, really the Baroque sort of thing. But you can see for yourself, it's a very unique looking building. Um, it has value as a unique looking building, but it doesn't look like a church. I mean, it could be anything really. But so that's what I've got there. Let me see here, and just I'll stop that on the stream. Okay, Vladika, you've disappeared. There you are. Okay, Vladika, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry, my microphone. I'm having my computer's, kind of old. It has power problems. But my point was is that if you read Saint Hilarion Troitsky's article or letter, his criticisms really only apply to basically the Gothic period, and then thereafter, increasingly, these criticisms wouldn't apply, let's say, to Romanesque church design and interior painting. So, anyway, let's move on.
Okay. And so we get to now. You had mentioned an interesting story, and I translated that about the. It was actually about I guess, a priest in Ukraine. If you could give a little background while I pull that up.
Yeah, it's through Google Translate. I only learned about this because it's mentioned on the Union of Orthodox Journalists, which is a Ukrainian Moscow Patriarchate news site. There was a Ukrainian priest, a Ukrainian autocephalous priest, who was a member of Poltava City Council, and he did say something. He made a statement, an anti-abortion statement or a pro-life statement on Facebook. And
Right.
he did use like a vulgar thing about about a dog and or something like that. A woman is like the B word as such. All right, in referencing to women who have abortions or something. All right, and that's obviously you can say that's objectionable. Priests shouldn't act like that. But his whole point was that women should not be allowed to have abortions. All right, because it's murder. And it caused the Ukrainian so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is the Fanor-created autocephalous group, to basically suspend him. And and if you read the article, his name is Alexander Dedukin,
Did you can, yeah.
Dedukin, and basically saying, abortion is murder, it's wrong. And he was attacked for basically, even though the OCU basically said, well, we're against, human life begins at conception. Their attitude almost seems to be that to be part of the new Europe, this has to be like a private opinion, right? It can't be part of law, all right? And the European Solidarity Party, I guess, which he's part of, said that this is not in accordance with EU values, which it really isn't. I mean, who wants EU values, though? But my point is that this is part of, this is people wanted to be part of a fan or approved organization, all right? And if you're going to be part of a fan or approved organization, you're going to be integrated into the European Union, all right? Which also means what? Essentially the Fordhamites, or the Fordhamite philosophy is going to reign, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I'm on the one hand, it's like the fact that they obviously were going to suspend him for not having EU values is one thing. The coarse language, unfortunately, kind of, I think, opened that door. And I think that it's really what it's come down to is that people are becoming more and more likely to walk on eggshells and self-censor. And this is part of the reason we're broadcasting this first on Odysee. Is because of the fact that YouTube has rampant censorship. And this is why the Orthodox Apologetics channel also broadcasts primarily on Odysee and then broadcasts secondarily to YouTube. So this is, it is a problem. It is a real problem in terms of, where do we compromise with, I guess you could say the secular authority, and that it's getting worse. I'm looking here. There's an article in Georgia Today, which is, I mean, I hate to say it, it's a completely Western-funded news source. And the title of this article 10 days ago is "The Georgian Orthodox Church is Undermining Georgia's Secular Democracy." And so when I read that, I thought, this doesn't sound like, it reminded me of the Moscow Times, which are usually these like liberal American magazines. And so, but it was like the first thing that popped up when I was looking for news on Georgia. And so I went, to it, and I'll just pull up that article there, and then I'll show you the About Us page, and you can see what I mean. You have to, even news sites that look completely legitimate at this point, you have to question where they come from, who's paying them, what's the purpose to it. So you see, this is an article. It's talking about the lynch mob you mentioned earlier before the show. I guess because they attacked journalists who were covering this Pride Parade thing.
Well, did they actually lynch somebody?
No, they called it a lynch mob here.
Oh.
So you can already tell what their side of the story is.
Well,
dozens of journalists,
the so-called mob or the counter-protesters, the Georgia nationalists, they did not want homosexual propaganda and sodomite organizations publicly operating in the streets. All right? I mean, that's clear. That's I mean, if this had, I can guarantee you, if this was like 19, I mean, what happened in Georgia? What was this, about 2 weeks ago or so, 4 weeks ago?
Almost
July
4
11th?
weeks ago.
Yeah, 4 or 5 weeks ago. What happened in Georgia would have been the norm, even, I dare say, 56 back in 1950 in any country. All right? I mean, even in the 60s, probably there would have been a riot of some sort.
Well, right? Look at this is how ridiculous this is. This is supposed to be a Georgian website about Georgia, and this is an op-ed from the Daily Beast.
Oh, what is the Daily Beast?
The Daily Beast is it's a liberal online newspaper based in the U.S. If we go to history on the About Us page, it flatly tells you this: we're independent, unbiased. 20 years experience in the Georgian market, leading English language platform. And then, professional editorial team.
Anybody who says they're unbiased, immediately they're biased.
Yeah, and this is funny because their editorial team is headed by a Brit. EU Prize for Journalism, the most frequently cited news source in worldwide media, among them the BBC, CNN, and Radio Liberty.
Yeah. Credibility goes down to zero now.
Yeah, I know, exactly. This is like, Okay, come on.
I mean, at least you can read what the internationalist powers want you to think Georgia should be like. That's kind of
Right, and it
that's giving
gets
their
harder to
opinion.
find an actual Georgian newspaper because of that, because these people flood the airwaves, and so this was something that when I lived in Russia, I experienced like really harshly. And what I mean by that is that the press was completely different. It presented a completely different side, and you don't realize. I used to think of myself back then as a pretty high information person. And what ended up happening was I realized I was in an information silo, and it was really controlled by the media forces here.
Well, wait a second.
That's
Look at the last part of the article. All right, the last
okay.
paragraph. It says the Georgian people are fiercely independent. The country has been invaded by every empire worth its salt. Georgia's spirit of independence is the reason that it remains free. This is the great irony of the events of July 5th. Those attempting to defend Georgia's national identity and freedom do the bidding of those who want to take it away. Well, so is sodomite and foreign immoral values? That's not part of Georgia's national identity.
Yeah, but it tells you two paragraphs.
Georgia's national identity is what? It's traditionally orthodoxy,
Yeah.
Orthodox Georgian culture and
Well,
society.
they even put Orthodox Christians here in quotes. So, I mean, this is like really like it goes off on the Georgian church here, mentions the Kremlin, and two paragraphs
Oh, they
above
brought
where
up
you were reading.
Alexander Dugin. I can see he's the boogeyman of everybody now.
Oh yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. Everyone is at Alexander Dugin if you give them long enough, apparently. And then, of course, there's a statement from the U.S. State Department because, of course, we really have a lot of things to do in Georgia. But it's ridiculous. It gets more and more ridiculous as time goes on.
Well, the irony is a lot of these Georgia nationalists probably don't. I mean, they didn't like the Russian. I mean, they're not necessarily favoring, let's say, Russian forces in Abkhazia or South Ossetia, but that doesn't mean they want to have this EU stuff in their country. That's the problem here. It's either they can't have any independent policy. All right, independent policy as far as this newspaper goes means conforming to liberal Western values. All right.
Yep.
So, and that's no independent policy. That's just simply being a slave to international capital and the United States. So
yeah, unfortunately, that's true. Let me see. The next article I saw, this was I saw it recently, but it seems like it's over a month old. And this was if you know about Archbishop Elpidopoulos of the Greek Archdiocese. Basically, he's been busy. Let's put it this way: he's been busy between going to the BLM marches last year and blocking people on Twitter who disagree with him. He's been doing stuff. I don't think it's good stuff, but I noticed that a website called Orthodox Reflections wrote a very interesting article about that. Basically, he presided over, and I'll just read it, because it's fairly short. It says, on the feast day of St. Bartholomew, June 11th, this is on the new calendar, Archbishop Elpidopoulos says of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America presided over a divine liturgy at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church in Manhattan. He was joined by several other GOARC hierarchs and Archbishop Michael of New York, New Jersey of the OCA. This liturgy caused quite a bit of controversy. The Episcopal parish of, quote, St. Bart's is very pro-sodomy. Just 5 days before the Orthodox hierarchs presided over this liturgy, the parish held a blessing for a pride flag to fly in front of the building the entire month of June. This is the announcement of that event from the parish website. The LGBTQ plus pride flag, which will fly over Park Avenue for the entire month of June, will be blessed in a brief ceremony on the church steps after the 5 p.m. Eucharist on Sunday, June 6th. Come and celebrate the inclusive nature of God's love. All are welcome. The flag, evidently representing the love of God, was proudly flying from the front of the building while Orthodox hierarchs were presiding over a divine liturgy inside. The juxtaposition of this imagery is jarring. This liturgy should not be considered an isolated event, but part of an ongoing revolution. A revolution, you might ask? Wouldn't you notice that if that were happening, like the way art, liturgy, and spirituality changed in the Roman Church after Vatican II, or the way Catholicism is changing dramatically in Germany as clergy openly defy the Pope by blessing same-sex unions? Now, I'm going to stop there because I'm not even sure if that's totally accurate, that they're kind of defying the Pope on it, because the Pope has kind of made indications that he's not actually against that. But yeah, it's a little bit disturbing. Well, not a little bit. I mean, it's a little disturbing for me because I'm not involved in any of it, so it doesn't
Well,
it doesn't matter to me. But
continue reading.
okay, hold on. Let me go. You find it. Okay. The structure of the Orthodox Church makes such overt revolutionary tactics close to impossible. Orthodoxy is specifically designed not to change. The Church is decentralized, making it difficult to propagate innovations. The faithful are dedicated to tradition and historically prone to vocal resistance. Dogma is considered fixed, and Orthodox moral teachings aren't voted on at periodic conventions. In the West, multiple jurisdictions coexist side by side. Anything too openly radical would panic the faithful, who would then likely flee, taking their checkbooks with them. Precious few Orthodox parishes have trust funds to cover such a loss of revenue, unlike our Episcopal quote-unquote brothers, who are blessed with over $4.5 billion in assets between their parishes and dioceses. Given the peculiarity of orthodoxy, our Orthodox revolutionaries have to be smarter than those in other quote-unquote Christian traditions. They must introduce changes slowly and incrementally. All the while, Orthodox revolutionaries must convince the quote unenlightened that nothing of any great importance is actually happening. In many ways, the stealth method of revolution is more dangerous than overtly challenging within the existing norms, as a potential opposition can't decide if there's even a threat. Called a revolution within the form, this method of transforming historical institutions has been stunningly successful at winning the battle before most of the victims even notice they are under attack. I'm not sure what they're quoting here, but it says, revolution within the form is a subversive tactic that seeks surreptitiously to replace the form of old things or words with new and or progressive meanings in order to bring about a contrary state of things that normally would not be accepted by society. Basically, the names of the old things are preserved, but their meanings have been altered. This can be applied to laws, forms of government, traditional philosophy, art, and language. Just like camouflage on clothing obscures the wearer and is beneficial in military situations, so this method is quite successful because when another meaning is being hidden under an old thing, it becomes imperceptible to many and the new is easily adopted. It is only one of the many modalities of revolutionary strategy. Society is transformed without it ever being conscious of what's going on. This is not a new concept, as it was first described by Aristotle. Machiavelli endorsed this message for transforming Italian city-states into modern polities, despite the wishes of their citizens. Joe Sobran, a Catholic commentator, said of the revolutionary tactic, the revolutionaries realized that their power depends on the illusion of continuity, the overturning of fundamental principles, the destruction of tradition, the creation of new powers. These must all be presented as mere reforms.
Well, I think this has been going on for a very long time. I mean, that's what happened with the introduction of ecumenism and modernism, at least perhaps even back in the 19th century in some forms.
Yeah,
and especially it took off into the 20th century. That people would say nothing's really changed. Everything looks the same. Well, in the seminaries, they're teaching, biblical criticism. The Old Testament's not historically accurate, and things just gradually move on and on like that. What do you have to say, Father?
Well, I was continuing to read, and this is kind of like this now goes into the mentality of people who start defending this stupidity.
Oh, and there's more to see. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. The minutes after the word of the liturgy at St. Bart's hit the news, well-meaning commentators were already defending the event. What's the big deal? Only Orthodox clergy can celebrate it. Our mission parish rents a hall to do liturgy. This is common. This liturgy in an Episcopal church was a great way to evangelize. The first reaction of many Orthodox faithful is to find any and all reasons to defend the actions of a hierarch, no matter how suspect. This innocent tendency to defend the hierarchs is something the revolutionaries absolutely depend on. This situation is even better for them when there is at least some truth in the defenses raised over any perceived hierarchical misstep. Renting a hall or space for liturgy or special event is actually quite common, particularly among impoverished parishes. That fact is not in dispute. However, the totality of circumstances around this particular quote-unquote rental are not at all normal or common. How many rental locations chosen by Orthodox parishes to hold liturgy are essentially LGBTQ clubhouses? How many are adorned with pride flags prominently displayed on the building during an Orthodox liturgy? How many Orthodox clerics holding liturgy under such circumstances would proudly boast of their actions to the entire world? Good questions. But the genius of revolution within the form is that if you want to ignore such questions, you can. In fact, if you are of such a mind, you can righteously and indignantly attack anyone expressing doubts about this liturgy as, quote, a Protestant who wants to tear down our bishops. You can use an important Orthodox principle, obedience to spiritual authority, as cover for accepting an Orthodox hierarch enthusiastically serving at a pro-sodomy propaganda prop. Quite a few commentators pointed to the presence of Archbishop Michael of the OCA as proof that everything with the liturgy was spiritually fine. The Archbishop is known as a traditionalist, so if he attended, there must be no problem with the liturgy or the venue, pride flag in front of the building or not. His presence forced Metropolitan Tikhon of the OCA to defend the event in an email to a concerned OCA layman. Let me be, and this is, I guess, a former Metropolitan Tikhon saying, let me be clear and state unambiguously the following. The fidelity of the Orthodox Church in America to the faith and moral teaching of the Church is unchanged. The concelebration of His Eminence Archbishop Michael with His Eminence Archbishop Alpidophoros and other bishops of the Greek Orthodox Church was exactly that, a concelebration of Orthodox hierarchs and clergy. No texts, statements, or gestures were undertaken, made, or even proposed with respect to any moral issues. In no way should this event be taken by anyone as a modification in any way of the Church's moral teaching or as laying the groundwork to modify it in any way. In case you are concerned about the optics of the event undermining Orthodox witness, or that we are lending our moral authority to prop up the thoroughly debauched Episcopal quote-unquote church, or that this event will serve as precedent for worse to come, please just calm down. The Metropolitan of the Orthodox Church of America has declared officially, nothing to see here, please move along. During his homily while serving liturgy in a building bedecked by a massive and quote-unquote blessed LGBTQ flag, Archbishop Elpidopoulos proclaimed a very interesting concept of ecumenicity. And he said, as Orthodox Christians, we're not about exclusivity, but about authenticity. We say with the Lord Jesus Christ, whoever is not against us is for us. They put an asterisk, so I guess they had something to say about that. But we openly embrace those who differ from us, not to manifest any compromise, but to extend to others the love and acceptance of Christ. We're very welcome here indeed. The honor shown by our Episcopalian brothers and sisters to our Patriarch is a sign that bodes well for the future of the ecumenical movement. By this time, we all know what gulfs separate us. Perhaps then we should spend more time focusing on building bridges than on acknowledging walls. For as the Lord said, by this all the people will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. Therefore, this ecumenical commitment stands at the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. To make such statements of fraternal solidarity with the Episcopal Church, it was necessary to gloss over many things in the name of quote-unquote love, even as Archbishop Elpidopoulos did so. An OCA traditionalist, quote-unquote, Archbishop was next to him, implicitly endorsing all that was said and done. Since Metropolitan Tikhon defended the event after the fact, everything must have just been hunky-dory. Brilliant move that making the OCA complicit. Too bad they didn't rope in a Rokor bishop to really squelch all potential future criticisms. I don't think they're that dumb in Rokor, so I don't think they do that.
I don't know, but okay, go ahead.
But the new love is all that matters. Archbishop Elpidopoulos' sermon borrowed the essential theme of the gay pride movement. Love is all that matters, and the revolutionaries get to define what, quote, love means. Love means that the unconverted spouses of Orthodox Christians can share in the Holy Eucharist. Love is love, right? He's actually referencing Archbishop Elpidopoulos allowing that. We as Orthodox are not about exclusivity. Archbishop Elpidopoulos said so. Why are you against a nice couple like Demetrius and Jennifer and their cute kids being united in church just because Jennifer wants to stay Methodist? Do you want to drive them out of the church, you bigot? Never mind that this move is an uncanonical innovation. Never mind that unworthily receiving the Eucharist is actually spiritually harmful to the unconverted spouses. Also ignore that this move opens the door to intercommunion with other heterodox in the future. After all, are not the Roman and Episcopal quote-unquote churches our brothers in Trinitarian belief? What are a few differences in theology, morality, ethics, and liturgical practice to compare to love? Let's focus on bridges and not walls, okay? Love means that, quote, the witness of many Christian homosexual couples speaks against the concepts promoted by rigorists of the binary mindset. That's from Public Orthodoxy. That's actually from The Wheel.
The link is Public Orthodoxy, though.
Yeah, right. She was writing that's the editor of The Wheel, you're right. She was writing in Public Orthodoxy, which was sponsored by the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University. Nice committed homosexual couples should be treated the same as heterosexual couples. To do otherwise is mean and unloving. The revolutionaries use appeals to love to soften and hide their true aims, lest anyone panic. We aren't going to change the mysteries of communion and marriage. We're just expanding them out of love by blessing same-sex marriages and opening our communion to other Christians. Yay, more love. Everything will be the same, only better.
Father Joseph, stop here for a moment. It seems that their understanding of love is simply uninhibited indulgence about everything. It's just, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't, I guess, physically attack somebody, I guess. It's not the Christian understanding of love, which is to love God and to love God is to follow His commandments. So
no, in no way, shape, or form. And this is actually, I had read the beginning of this article. I didn't know it was so long because I saw those advertising bars for other articles.
Yeah.
So this is a whole section I hadn't actually read before. It's actually pretty good. Isn't such unity the way things should be? After all, Archbishop Elphidopoulos said in his sermon about Patriarch Bartholomew, he's a living apostle of love, peace, and reconciliation. Love means following COVID mandates, no matter what they are, to, quote, save lives, close parishes, change liturgical practices, mandate Mass for unvaccinated parishioners, even toddlers, close your businesses and stay home, deny your children education, silence hierarchs who question the vaccines and mandates, make seminarians take an experimental vaccine that has a history of severe reactions for younger men. All good. If you love your neighbor, then do what you're told, follow the hierarchs, and stop asking inconvenient questions. Ignore the fact that each accommodation sets yet another precedent that government edicts supersede Orthodox religious freedom and holy tradition. Ignore the fact that such precedents make even more stringent government control likely in the future. Could the government someday successfully outlaw discrimination in employment and facility rental? Or mandate vaccine passports for attendance at liturgy? If any of that happens, can you not already hear the voices shouting that Orthodox churches must comply as we did during COVID? Homosexual clergy, female clergy, transhuman clergy, gay weddings, polyamory, restricted attendance at liturgy, clergy politically vetting parishioners, vaccine passports, government writing church school curriculum. No choice. As Christians, we must obey the law. Otherwise, we're not good citizens or good Christians. And then there's a nice picture of St. Tikhon here, and it says, while under house arrest, Patriarch Tikhon was brought as a witness for the defense in a Soviet trial. Do you consider the state's laws obligatory or not? He was asked. St. Tikhon replied, yes, I recognize them to the extent that they do not contradict the rules of piety. But none of that will ever happen, they assure us. COVID was a one-time deal. Quit being selfish just because you were denied communion for a brief time and now have to wear a mask because you refuse a perfectly safe experimental vaccine. There's no Christian persecution. You're just imagining things. You're just a bad pre-modern person who doesn't love others and clings to an outdated view of your Orthodox faith. Get with the program and stop worrying. What if our love helps send people to hell because we actively encourage them to remain in their heresies and sins by accepting them, or make them slaves to sin in this life, causing them utter misery? Isn't real love telling the truth in hopes that people repent and embrace God? Never mind that you Neanderthals. That was the old Christian love. Love is new and improved. A loving God would never condemn anyone to hell. Just ask David Bentley Hart. Eternal life is for everyone, a fact that you will all come to acknowledge one day whether you like it or not. We need to focus on things that really matter, such as combating systemic racism and climate change. Those are real Christian priorities for the modern world, especially since we can agree with the Episcopal Church and Pope Francis on those things and sidestep all those icky historical points of a disagreement that keep us from getting invited to the really good cocktail parties. And so this last part is entitled Viva la Revolution. It says, from a revolutionary perspective, the Divine Liturgy at St. Bart's could not have been a more stunning success. Those who wish to defend it have cover to do so. Those who support transforming the Orthodox Church can take heart at the words, actions, and symbolism on display. For them, this was a mighty loud dog whistle. Those who oppose changing the Orthodox Church, but who wish to avoid crime think, can plausibly publicly pretend everything is just fine. Their willing disbelief and inaction are essential to the revolution. By the time they realize anything's amiss, it'll likely be too late to do anything anyway. Those complaining about the true significance of the event, both implicit and explicit, can be dismissed as pick your favorites, convertidox, conspiracy theorists, anti-Greek, Russian bots, fanaticists, racists, homophobes, Trump worshippers, so many insults to choose from. The same people so concerned about othering are certainly anxious to do so in the case of evil conservatives. Sadly, as long as the same hierarchs perform the same liturgical rites in the same churches with the same icons and in the same languages, while the most radical positions are advocated only by academics and not the hierarchs who fund them, then the revolution will roll on inexorably and incrementally while hidden in plain sight. And this was written by Nicholas, a member of the Antiochian Western Rite Vicarious and a COVID refugee from the Greek Archdiocese.
We know that the strategy that's being used that for the past 100 years, gradually in world Orthodoxy, is identical to what happened in the Papist Church, in Roman Catholicism, where they could have Papist bishops saying, we haven't changed anything about our teaching, but they would have, for example, even before the liturgical changes in 65, 69, 70, they were having changes in their seminaries. They had, people like Raymond Brown, I think was it Raymond Brown, teaching that, you didn't have to believe in the resurrection back in the early 60s. All right. And, except the difference with them is that they had a centralized religious structure, so they could force changes on everybody. I only have to worry about maybe 1% of people resisting, I guess.
Well, that's kind of the advantage of Orthodoxy's decentralization. It does not allow for that because there can always be people who can, try to stop it.
Oh, well, no, you can still do it. It just it's more roundabout to do it.
Yeah, but my point is that first in the first place, if the Holy Spirit guides the Orthodox Church, which we obviously both believe, then there's always going to be a way to get out. There's always going to be a fail-safe because of that decentralized nature.
Yes, that's true. But I'm saying to take over the institutional structures can still happen. It's not as efficient, I think, as in papacy to do that because you don't have a centralized organization. So.
Well, one of the things that in this, I don't want to riff too much on this, but one of the things that is the problem, you had mentioned this with the change of the calendar of the Antiochians, which was funded by rich Americans in 1942. Ultimately, the real power of the Greek Archdiocese is here. In Constantinople, they have 300 parishioners? I
think theoretically there are 3,000 Greek members in Istanbul, but I think only a few hundred people go to church, maybe a little bit more on a feast day or something like that.
Right. And
so they used to fly people in, I know.
Well, in other words, the point I'm trying to make is that Constantinople itself is not powerful in and of itself in terms of what it can do. It really gets its power from its parishes in the U.S., the archons, who are basically rich millionaires and not altogether unlike the mafia.
There's Canada also and Australia too. So I mean,
yeah, and we're seeing these same problems
the new calendar, essentially the new calendar Greek diaspora and those other groups like Ukrainians and Carpatho-Russians that they have under their control, where they extract money from. And
that all goes directly to Constantinople. So that's what gives them the you want to say the ability to say what they do, but it also lets them act as a puppet of state policy. And I hate to say this, but the policy guiding Constantinople for quite a long time has been U.S. state policy.
Well, I think it was probably in the 1920s. It was British policy, but then after World War II, it became American policy.
Yeah.
Because what Athenagoras was flown, I mean, that's a well-known fact. In fact, he was supported by the State Department. They originally elected a Metropolitan Chrysostomos or George or some, Gregory or something, and they got rid of him. They said, no, Athenagoras is going to be the patriarch. And they flew him over in the vice president's plane. So,
yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that.
That's also what's so important about the Fanner establishing, the Epiphany group. In Ukraine,
and they paid
$2 million, $3 million, up to maybe $10 million, and they were supposed to be a revenue stream. Now, I don't know how effective that's going to be, considering the fact that Ukraine is perhaps the most corrupt, more than Bulgaria, but it's probably the most corrupt and one of the poorest countries in all of Europe. And I don't know if they're going to be able to fund all this, but they, so okay.
But
there's also Elapidorus. Another point of news was he was at the International Religious Freedom Summit on July 15th.
Oh, okay. That was let me just see if I can pull that one up because I didn't even get a chance to see this one. So give me just a moment while I add that to the screen. and we'll go through it. And if you want to read that one, Vladika, hold on one moment while I share.
I think you should. You go ahead and read it, Father.
Okay.
I'm a little dehydrated. I'm having to drink some water right now.
Yeah, I am too. All right. So His Eminence. Okay, this is the title of this address is "The Rising Tide of Religious Nationalism."
Here's every 2 to 3 paragraphs. Let's stop and talk about what he said. Okay, that way I can contribute a little bit. But you do the reading. Okay.
All right. So it's to Ambassador Brownback and President Sweat. Okay, so it's it's a great privilege to be with you today, and I want to express the appreciation of the Greek Orthodox Church of America, a province of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Mother Church of Eastern Christianity, for the exceptional work of the International Religious Freedom Summits. The partner and supporting entities bear witness to the inclusive and comprehensive nature of the vision for human liberty and freedom of conscience we seek to enhance around the globe. I shall commence the subject of my remarks with the following observation. Religious nationalism is only one side of the coin. There is also nationalistic religion. Much like the terms Caesaro-Papism and Papo-Caesarism that describe the tensions between political and ecclesial autocracies of centuries past, the interest of the state and those who desire some form of theocracy are seldom aligned. The shoreline where these rising tides appear is a very long one with diverse landscapes. Here in the United States, we have witnessed, especially in recent years, how independent religious bodies with charismatic leaders are using the public political sphere to advance their own agendas. This is a clear case of nationalistic religion, where identity politics are incorporated into a religious entity in order to advance a religious agenda. Should a tide rise to an undue influence either in the legislative, judicial, or executive branches of government, it would challenge the very idea of the First Amendment and the non-establishment clause concerning religion. Okay, and then it says, on the other hand, we could look at some aspects of modern Iran and find a distinct brand of religious nationalism, a full-blown attempt at theocracy by a seeming majority. But to see a spiritual basis for the state is to create a stratification of society along religious lines, a spiritual apartheid, if you will. The result is a monolithic society unyielding to diversity. Okay, and let me see here. I don't know if you wanted to take a moment to discuss that or... Hold on. You dropped off the stream again.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, you're back.
My microphone is going in and out. But let's stop for a second. Do you know who he's speaking about when he talks about charismatic leaders using the public political sphere to advance their own agenda? These nationalistic religious figures. Who is he speaking about in particular?
I mean, honestly, the first thing that goes through my head is Trump. But
Trump is a religious leader?
No, he's not. But the point is that it's the same language used towards the whole charismatic leader trying to, use jingoistic language and so on and so forth.
Also, in essence, it's based. I mean, I don't like Trump, but this is just simply a purely anti-Trump, just to be anti-Trump. There's a Trump derangement syndrome in the Greek Archdiocese, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. But who did you have in mind?
No, I don't know. I was trying to think, who is he talking about exactly?
Yeah, because I don't know of any charismatic nationalistic religious leaders that are, taking the country by storm.
She says Caesaro-Papism and Papo-Caesarism that describes the tensions between political and ecclesial autocracies of centuries past. The interests of the state and those who desire some form of theocracy is set them aligned. Has he ignored the entire history of the great Eastern Christian power, the Byzantine Empire here? He's speaking as if in this ultra-detached... I mean, he's supposed to be Greek. And he's supposed to claim, if he's part of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, some inheritance from that. All right?
Yeah, but that's all gone, because that's not what the Patriarchate's about anymore.
Okay, so, Justinian, the Ecumenical Councils, they basically have no bearing on how Orthodox Christians understand themselves. All right? Yeah. So, this, in essence, he's rejecting here the concept of symphony.
Yeah.
Right? He mask it under the name Caesaro-Papism or Papo-Caesarism.
It gets worse. He's about to get really worse with it.
Okay. Secondly, another point. He says that it would challenge the very idea of the First Amendment and the non-establishment clause concerning religion. I know this is an old hat thing to say from old paleo conservatives and such, but the First Amendment originally only applied to what the federal government could do. It actually did not apply to the states. That's later incorporation doctrine. If you look in the early United States, most of them had either established state churches, at least the first 20 or 30 or 40 years, or at least established religions, or they even had, for example, there were blasphemy prosecutions up until at least the 1890s or 1900s.
I didn't know that.
I mean, you couldn't publicly blaspheme, the Virgin Mary and or Christ. I mean, I think there was a prosecution back in the 1940s of an atheist who publicly attacked the virgin birth, like in Massachusetts or something like that. I think they kind of went out of fashion after that. My point is that, that's just a little point to make about that. Okay.
Well, it gets worse. It says, when you elevate one religion above all others, it is as if you decide there's only one path leading to the top of the mountain. But the truth is, you simply cannot see the myriads of paths that lead to the same destination, because you are surrounded by boulders of prejudice that obscure your view.
And Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So there's
clearly, he was wrong.
Also, remember, the Lord said, "Broad is the way, and broad is the way that leads to destruction."
Yeah, straight is the gate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
But Archbishop Elpidophorus says, of course,
he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned.
I feel like you're not buying into this multiple paths.
There's just too much against it. I don't really think he's making a convincing case here.
Then he goes, finally, there's a hybrid of the two, as in the case of the Russian Federation and the post-Soviet Russian Orthodox Church.
Okay,
the painful history of the church under the communist regime came to a sudden and stunning halt with the fall of the Iron Curtain. However, even as the Russian Federation morphed into its present form, the newly freed Russian Orthodox Church struggled to rebuild its place in society. Its cooperation and support of the state has been a way for it to regain its former glories. Yet it is the state itself that has benefited from the, quote, religious nationalism created by the reborn Orthodox Church within its borders, precisely because the Moscow Patriarchate maintains much of the contours of the old Soviet Union. The close relationship between the State Foreign Ministry and the Church Department of External Relations is well known. Okay, now I gotta stop.
Can you hear me, Father?
Yes, I can hear you.
Just so you know, my monitor has gone out, so I can only hear. Okay.
All right. Well, I gotta say something here, because what he's saying. Of course, he's kind of hinting at Sergianism. He's kind of hinting, the Moscow Patriarchate is, a holdover from this, the Soviet regime. He's literally saying this at a speech in front of an American think tank with an ambassador, a U.S. ambassador in presence, to imply that in some way, shape, or form, he's just abstractly analyzing just how close the Russian Orthodox Church is with the state. But he's doing it from a vehicle of the state.
Yes, and he's part of the FANR. He's basically the CIA Sergianism.
Yeah, exactly.
Trumanism, or whatever they want to call it.
Then it says, through the networks of the Moscow Patriarchate, the Russian Federation is able to exert influence in the new nation-states that emerged after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Ukraine is a case in point, where a local Orthodox Church was established legally and canonically by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, yet the Moscow Patriarchate continues to maintain its own identity. This is clearly in the interests of the Russian Federation, which benefits as much, if not more, from its religious nationalism as the church does from its nationalistic religion.
Now, again, here's the problem I'm having with all this. He is implicitly. Why should I be surprised? He's accepting liberalism, all right, Enlightenment liberalism, separation of church and state. That the Orthodox Christians should not seek to have the Orthodox Church or any religion, but really should be the Orthodox Church should be the official religion of the state. That is the traditional position of the Church Fathers down the centuries. They didn't mean they wanted to. They didn't mean any of the Church Fathers wanted to put people to death or something like that. All right, but that is the traditional position. Secondly, you can see how far, I hate to use political terms, but how far left wing in terms of theology or whatever, it would be abuse to call it theology, but religious views, Elpidophorus is. All right, when he is considering the Moscow Patriarchate to be this almost fundamentalist, I've heard them say fundamentalist organization. I mean, if you think Patriarch Kirill Gundayev is this gigantically obscurantist fundamentalist fanatic, you have no idea what's going on in religious life in the Moscow Patriarchate.
Well, on the flip side of that,
but do you see my point? Is that but from their perspective, he is that. All right, because
But
he's doing liturgies at gay churches. So
yeah,
if you don't want to do liturgies at gay churches, then you're a fundamentalist.
But that's exactly my point. If Patriarch Kirill Gandaev, who was the chief ecumenist of the Moscow Patriarchate, at this point is no longer fully convinced that Constantinople is Orthodox based on their behaviors, I mean, it's not exactly like he's a super hardcore conservative who's, saying.
Well, remember, Kirill hasn't said that. He's simply, I mean, they're not in communion and such. But he hasn't even gone to that point. I mean, there have been people within them that, minority voices that have said things.
No. I mean, one of the things I brought this up before is that the way he broke communion was by switching the diptychs to for all Orthodox bishops. Effectively, he does not recognize the Patriarch of Constantinople, and he hasn't for like 3 years.
Yeah, no. He doesn't commemorate the Patriarch of Constantinople. He does commemorate other patriarchs, but he doesn't commemorate Constantinople, Athens, Alexandria. I think there's in Cyprus.
Yeah, but what I mean by that is because normally he would commemorate the Patriarchate of Constantinople first.
Yeah, but he does mention the other. He does mention the
Yeah, he mentions them right. He starts with for all Orthodox patriarchs. My point is he does not. He can't include Constantinople in his.
But the point is still, Kirill Gandaev, who is basically, I consider, he's more or less a conservative modernist within the MP. Okay?
Yeah, I would say
he's a modernist, but he's like a Benedict type figure. Okay, all right, and that's not defending Benedict. I mean, Benedict's a conservative modernist. But my point is that
I would say Benedict's a full modernist, but
within the papism, he is more of a conservative modernist within papism.
Yeah.
All right. If you compare him to like Francis or something like that. All right.
Well, so Francis is his own. Yeah.
Okay. So Francis doesn't believe in anything. I can tell you.
Yeah, he's just.
Essentially, he's a pantheist or some sort. But my point is Elpidophoros. Elephant Man. I can never quite pronounce his name.
Elpidophoros.
I'm sorry. His view, again, I think he is, look, the Moscow Patriarchate is this reactionary fundamentalist organization that's promoting, ultra religious nationalism. I mean, that's simply not true. Nationalism is actually not viewed the word nationalism in many official Russian magazines that are, pro United Russia is not necessarily considered a good word.
Yeah.
Right. They're more of almost what you call Eurasianism, which is this concept of almost like a civic nationalism of the Russian Federation. And that has to do with the fact that, one, there's a lot of tensions in Russia, as you know, between ethnic Russians and, Caucasians, the Caucasus peoples. All right. I don't know if you remember the cases of like people being stabbed on trains.
Yeah.
All right. So they actually de-emphasize a lot of that stuff. They try to say, oh, you can have autonomy and such, but they kind of de-emphasize some of, even the word nationalism. All right. So my thinking is Elpidophoros is, if not saying Putin is great because he's enforced lockdown stuff too. I mean, that's the problem there. But if you just simply, what's happening here is if you just simply want to have an independent policy of Western liberalism, you are a nationalist. That's just how they view it. All right. That's
classical Western liberalism.
Yeah, classical Western liberalism. I mean, remember, it just morphs into different things over time. All right, because whether it's the neoconservatives, the Biden, which is nothing, what he believes, his brain is melted. Whoever is controlling him, that's basically the liberal, Western power. Everything in the West, all the government agencies are essentially liberal, whether they want to call themselves conservatives or whatever. It's just a form of liberalism, right? If you don't want to be controlled by that, then according to Elpidophoros, you're a nationalist. And I'm sure if you don't want to have abortion in your country, he'd also attack you as well. If you don't want to have, gay propaganda in your country, the Greek archdiocese are going to attack you as well. All right. Now, people should not forget that Bartholomew back in 94, 93, when he went to San Francisco, when he was still Metropolitan of Chalcedon, titular Metropolitan Chalcedon, he gave the speech about how there are many reasons a woman can have an abortion, and the church doesn't have a fundamental opposition to it. All right, and he spoke about aborting mentally retarded people. But remember what the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Cypriot New Calendars allowed in the 70s, where they allowed something like, tens of thousands of abortions because women claimed they were raped by Turkish soldiers. So the view is that if that's even true, the baby deserves to die because of the Turkish father. All right, so they've already made all these massive compromises. You go back into honestly, you go back in the early 20th, late 19th century, the Ecumenical Patriarchate was just, they had like 2 patriarchs assassinated.
Yeah.
It was just a simoniac organization, and everybody kind of knew about it. So this is essentially what it becomes after 200 years, or what was it? St. John Maximovich wrote the paper about the decline of the ecumenical patriarchy. All right, the report back in 1940 or 1938 to the Russian Church abroad. This is kind of the end stage
And
of.
in retaliation, the ecumenical patriarchate still refuses to recognize the glorification of Saint John of
Oh yeah,
Syria.
who was the archon? The archon that was saying he was a schismatic and he's not really orthodox because he allowed the Western
He's the one
Rite.
that he's the one that yaps a lot on Twitter.
Yeah,
Um,
those types of people. I mean, it's on the one hand they're attacking Saint John Maximovich for having a Western Orthodox rite, but on the other hand they're defending Bartholomew going to the ultra liberal Novus Ordo masses of the chief heretic of the Vatican. All
yeah.
right, which has no historical connection to liturgy, to any liturgy prior to the 1960s historical, just completely devoid of that. All right, go ahead, continue.
Okay, so it goes. These few examples, painted in broad strokes, highlight the kinds of exigencies that we're facing. By promoting one religion above others, states create an oversized monolith in the public square that de facto, and sometimes de jure, excludes the citizenry who do not conform to that religious point of view.
Well, that's the history. That's the history of
the
most
Roman
states,
Empire.
and of most states, even in the Russian Empire. In the Russian Empire, did Lutherans have the right to go to their own churches? Yes, they did. Were they the official religion? No. Did they have their own communities and could they regulate their own affairs? Yeah. I mean, if you were two Lutherans in the 1800s and they were married and they wanted to get a divorce, they had to go to a Lutheran religious court. Okay,
Right.
That was how it was operated. You had greater freedom in essence to run your own community affairs. Even the Jews had greater freedom, less interference from the state, which actually kind of became a problem because they ended up killing people who wanted to convert to Orthodox Christianity who were Jews. I mean, there was the famous Jacob Rothman who was murdered in his sleep. They later claimed he died of pneumonia, but he was strangled to death. He had to basically flee, the ghetto because the Jewish rabbis had so much. The Russian government just simply allowed them to have so much internal power over their own people. All right, so this is just simple. That was the way you establish peace and conformity throughout most of human history, especially in Christian countries, even if they weren't Orthodox Christian. All right. I mean, to be honest, things like the Inquisition, and I know that's probably exaggerated. I know the Black Legend, that's a big thing. Especially the British.
Well, one of the
British
things
made up a lot of stuff about that, especially the Spanish. But my point is that that's actually relatively an oddity of executing people. That's for their religious beliefs. That's kind of a strange thing that was developed by genuine papal interference. But anyway.
But I mean, this got me thinking. I was reading something earlier, and it was talking about the rise of I guess you could say, Islamic attempts to convert people in the West. And this, of course, got me thinking. Now, the author was Jewish, and so from their perspective, that this was going to be an attack on Judeo-Christian values. The problem is that what I realized as I was looking through that, I started thinking about the fact that, it's not like, the decline of our moral values had nothing to do with people who themselves were. Are you okay there, Vodika? 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 Hello? Okay. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, barely, but you're there.
I'm sorry, but I'm just having a.
Okay, so we'll give you a minute to try to fix that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was saying was that, basically, this concept of a culture war that is slowly developing because Islamists are not fans of they're not fans of the Christian worldview. They're not fans of the post-Christian Western worldview. And one could, I see it almost as a battle royale that is on the way between who really, I guess you could say, will win over the soul of America, because the secular humanistic position that we're in here now, it's not sustaining. It's starting to collapse, and it basically, like, there's a mob. It's kind of a mob mentality that's somewhat atheistic, but it doesn't. It's also nihilistic, so it's not going to last forever.
Maybe it's moving out. Do you think maybe it's moving out of the Masonic deistic phase? I mean, that's already kind of long since gone, right?
I don't know. I mean, I'd say that is the standard for pop culture at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's kind of.
I mean, that's obviously Elpidophoros' view is more or less a Masonic deism here.
Yeah, so. And that in that sense, he's clearly not representing orthodoxy. But the point is that there are many people who do want to represent orthodoxy, and so we're seeing these conflicting views. And of course, the papists have their own interests as well. So this is, I mean, I hate to say this, but the slow death of Protestantism seems to be kind of like a fertile battleground for everybody else to jump in America today. And so that, I think, is I was thinking about that earlier, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But in any case,
continue.
Yep. For the religious entity, the material advantages of state sponsorship should be far outweighed by the cost to the ethical, moral, and spiritual core of the faith tradition, any faith tradition. To put it in specifically Christian terms, for what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Throughout history, every religious body has had to face the choice of rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Yeah, I mean, again, I need to point out that it is really interesting to talk about this, commitment to, the freedom of the church in this state-sponsored, kind of a summit here.
We can ask Elpidophoros, what shall it profit him to gain the whole world and lose his soul? It's like he's quoting a scripture verse and he simply has no, or rendering unto Caesar, he has no, self-consciousness or self-realization.
Self-aware. He's completely self-unaware.
Yes. Or maybe he is and he doesn't care.
That's possible too. So how do we overcome these tides that seem to inexorably rise over time? First, we must confess that such monoliths are not consistent with a modern, pluralistic, and emergent world. Democracy still finds a way in the imagination of peoples who yearn for liberty. That is why the cultivation of indigenous democratic forms of government, not the imposition from without, is an answer for both the state and the religious culture. Because even a homogeneous religious culture is dependent on the individual's freedom in order for faith to be genuine and not coercive.
Okay, notice, however, he says that democracy still finds a way. All right, so this is almost Francis Fukuyama's view that democracy is the end of history. I don't know if you know who he is. He's kind of a political philosopher.
Yeah.
This is the last stage of history, democracy. All right. That's essentially what he's implying here, or he believes. All right.
The bigger problem with this is that this is what we have encountered now in this time period, especially with things like the COVID mandates and what they're shoving down people's throats, is that this is actually, what's the word? It's almost like a fascistic democracy in the sense that it's like, the loudest mob and the angriest mob gets to control everyone else.
Well, it's really an oligarchy. I mean, democracy is really oligarchy. It's the demagogue in the financial powers that control everything. There's democracy almost always turns into is almost always an illusion for oligarchical control.
Yeah.
So
then he says, second, we can accept that the historical journeys of any peoples possess complex and complicated markers that, if respected, create seawalls that hold back the troubling and troublesome tides. Allow me to close with a recent and very relevant example from the nation of my birth. Last year, in this very month of July, the most iconic edifice of Orthodox Christianity, the Hagia Sophia in modern Istanbul, had its status withdrawn and was reconverted into a mosque. This church was the largest church in the world in the first millennium of Christianity. The end of the Roman Empire in 1453 changed its use, as has happened throughout history to many religious edifices. But when the Turkish state emerged a century ago, it was deemed such a unique and potent symbol should emanate an inclusive message, one that served the interests of all citizens. Thus, the Hagia Sophia became a museum. For the Orthodox Christian world, this was not the best solution, but it was a vision for a future that included the incredible historical journey of Anatolia, not just one phase of that journey. We see in this reconversion how the tide rose, and we see in those that called this crisis out the effort to stem the tide. My fellow laborers in the field of human freedom and inclusivity, I have outlined only some of the shores against which the tides of, quote, religious nationalism and, quote, nationalistic religion are crashing. Our best seawalls are going to be built out of cooperative efforts to instill democracy and freedom of conscience around the globe. This summit is the most significant building block in that wall, and I thank you for your attention today and your service to this mission.
Well, thank God Elapodiferos and Bartholomew did not get control of Hagia Sophia. The building has suffered enough violation without having these two blasphemous heretics doing putative services in it. That's all I can say. I don't mourn the fact they didn't get control of it. All right.
Well, they were never going to get control of it.
They were never going to get control of it. Secondly, the building had already been polluted for hundreds of years. You know, if the choice, it becoming a mosque didn't mean anything really.
Well, so, I think that the sadder part is that he seems to be almost satisfied with its status as a museum. Mm-hmm. And that, bothers me to some degree because, I feel like he's putting this in the picture of the greater journey of the region. Okay, so now it's just the Hagia Sophia is just a marker for the conquest of the Turks. I feel like that's like a horrible message. But I thought it was interesting how he of course, commends his fellow laborers to instill democracy and freedom of conscience in places like Georgia, where, they can basically try to enforce their agendas, throughout the area. And, of course, in Ukraine, we know about that, and we know the Fanar's role in that. And so it's, this to me is an unfortunate but not unexpected speech given to an unfortunate but not unexpected group of people. So, in any case, I think we've covered some of the most recent events. Mm-hmm. There was an old Catholic bishop in Uganda who joined Gregory of Colorado, but I don't know if that's really that newsworthy. I mean, it's interesting, but he was that's about all I've got on my end. Did you have any comments or thoughts on some of these stories, Ladika?
No. I mean, it's anything that's said by the fan art, you know exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be mealy mouthed to one extent, and the other is simply going to be liberal modernism and ecumenism of the worst sort. It's just this. Anybody who has any illusion that this is going to end, it's not. It's going to get worse over time, and it gets worse over time. So,
yeah, there's got to be some way this plays out, but we really can't. We don't know how it plays out. Honestly,
did you see the article I sent you about the history of the attempts to reconvert the Melkites in the 19th century?
I did, and it was an interesting article. Basically, the abstract of the article is it's discussing at certain points, especially in the 18th to 19th centuries, well, the 19th century mostly, the Russian state's involvement in an attempt to bring the Melkites back to Orthodoxy, and.
Now, one of the things I found interesting, you can find in other texts, is a lot of the history of the 18th and 19th and 20th century in the Middle East was essentially Greek super ethnophilitism masquerading under the cover of Orthodox inclusivity. All right. For example, did you know the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre, which is entirely a Greek organization, maintained control of Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch in the 18th and 19th century? An Arab could not be elected patriarch. There was a massive battle in Antioch to even get an Arab elected patriarch.
Yeah, the Russians were influential in
exactly.
that.
And remember, Saint Raphael Hawawini talks about how the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre, I know people kind of have this kind of residual respect for it. I don't know why, kind of because it runs the Holy Sepulchre, I suppose.
They kept it on the old calendar.
They kept it. Well, I mean, the Monophysites kept the old calendar in Egypt too. So
yeah, but they're Monophysites, so they don't.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. Exactly. So like the Greek Catholics have the old calendars. That anyway.
Do they? I thought they were on.
Some of them do. Some of them do.
That's Ukraine, pretty funny.
That doesn't. It doesn't. What's the point? That's like this previous. That was Andrew and Nick, the guy who wrote that article, saying form is kept, but the substance changes.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I was a union and I was on the old calendar, so
Yeah. So my point was is that just because you have the old calendar doesn't mean anything really.
no.
It's the content of what it's supposed to be proclaiming. But anyway, saying Raphael Hawawini's point was that you could not even be a monk in a monastery in the Jerusalem Patriarchate until the 20th century if you were an Arab. All right.
Wow.
So at the same time, this is why, for example, the one hand, there's like, yeah, we abstractly agree with people trying to create, phyllotism or saying that one ethnic group has to dominate others in the church. That's evil and that's wrong. But the problem was that the fan art oftentimes it's for example the same thing with the Bulgarian thing. The more you read about this, I mean, the more you realize that almost all of the 18th and 19th and early 20th century was simply the dying attempts of the Phanariot Greek oligarchy to maintain control and oppress all these people. I mean, they're losing power. All these other countries are coming to the fore, and they're going to drag everybody down with them, right? And now you have the Fanar with the few archons who are maintain it and prop it up. They're kind of like the remnant of that oligarchy, and they're just raging. They're raging. They have no power. They're going down, and they're trying to drag everybody.
They have lots
down
of money though.
Yeah, they got lots of money. Like the Episcopal heretics have is $4.5 billion.
$4.5 billion in the war.
And that was the same thing in the Episcopal Church. Remember, they didn't care that dozens of clergy parishes would leave in the 70s of a women's ordination. Why didn't they care? Because they had endowments. It didn't matter. If you have billions of dollars, hundreds of millions, what does it matter if you lose individual churches or dozens of churches? They don't care. So.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point for today. We were going to try to do this on a regular basis. Again, it's going to be broadcast primarily live on Odysee. We will eventually have it hooked up live to YouTube. There's still some issues with the channel, but I will be putting a copy of the broadcast on the NFTU News Roundup YouTube channel as well. And so, if there's nothing else in that case, Vladika, we'll call it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being there. And
Thank you.
Benedicite.
Good night.